there's some really interesting arguments that compare the passage of Isaiah with Genesis, where it seems like the garden has an image of being paradisical, and
Mhm.
that in Isaiah you even have a passage where it seems like there's going to be extended lifespans, like in
Mhm.
Genesis we have,
Mhm.
and people reference the vegetarian of diet of animals and how the animals in
Mhm.
Isaiah aren't gonna be attacking each other. And then even there's the serpent reference where
Mhm.
it's the same language of the serpent eating dust. So how are those references in your mind? How we're supposed to interpret that? I mean, are we saying do you think the reference to Isaiah is saying, hey, like it's going to be just like it was before in the garden, like everything's going to be great, or is it saying that only some of these things, some of the good parts of the garden are going to be there? What's going on there?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I mean, obviously, when it says, "Behold, I'm creating a new heaven and new earth," it uses the verb bara, shemayim, and eretz, which heaven and earth, and that's right in Genesis 1 verse 1. So
Right.
there's no doubt that we're being brought back to the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and we're certainly being invited to say, the very God who we know created the entire cosmos is promising to do a new creation. And so, um, is this new creation saying we're going back to how it was in the beginning, or is this appealing to his ability to create something similar in kind but yet different? Um, I think that what we have, for instance, with the vegetarian, there's an article that said talks about this animal vegetarianism. What I kind of think as I read, I think the only read the early chapters of Genesis, I tend to think that carnivores were eating meat back then. The only thing that we're specifically told were that death would set into because of the fall was humans. And so I don't think that we have to say that there wasn't animal hostility, in the sense of needing to get food before the fall. Although they could have been vegetarians. So I might see less allusions back to kind of the Genesis 2 and 3 than others might see, but I think we certainly do see some. They become a lens for how we're thinking about God's future work. But what I would say, and there's a biblical theologian who's now passed away in the last few years named Bill Dumbrell. And he has a beautiful book that was ahead of its times in many ways called um, In Search of Order, Biblical Eschatology and Focus, or something like that. And he raises a really interesting question that was like, is Genesis 2, the garden, and was that created like absolutely perfect? And what he suggests is that wired into God's initial creation, while it was really good, was still going to leave room for a need for a new creation, which is even greater. And so I think that, like, Isaiah is alluding back, if you will, and certainly Revelation 21 and 22 are alluding back to like a recapturing of some of the essence of what's in the Garden of Eden, this pre fall reality, but it's actually even going to be better than that
Hmm.
because death won't even be possible according to Revelation 21 and 22. And there's not going to be a need for, sin is not going to enter into the equation, etc. So I think that certainly Isaiah, in terms of Isaiah itself, is drawing on some of those pre-fall themes. But I think that layered on top of that, especially when I compare, there's a verse that kind of, I think, in the Deuteronomy 28:30 or so range, where it's talking about others building, or living in the houses they built,
Hmm.
eating from the vineyards they planted. I think they're also seeing a stripping back of life under the curse of having violated the Sinai covenant, and an era where they're no longer living under God's judgment. So I'd kind of see some allusions back to early Genesis as well as to the covenant at Mount Sinai.
Yeah, the interesting part about that similarity with the ages is, I guess the whole idea of before the fall, like there was no death. If there was no
Mhm.
death, then it's weird if they're going to reference that as the pre-fall world. But
Mhm.
that was actually the whole ages, the long ages are actually after the fall, and because there
Oh
was
yeah,
no
yeah,
death. So
that's true. That's true. They, yeah,
so it's like there might be a reference, but it'd be really odd in my eyes for the writer to be make a claim pre-fall, like it's like going to be like pre-fall if he doesn't even describe pre-fall. Yeah.
yeah,
So I don't
yeah,
know what you're supposed to do with that, if there actually is a reference there with the whole ages and all that. But
yeah,
it is
yeah,
interesting either way. Um,
yeah, yeah. And when after the flood, when God says He'll shorten the lifespan of people to about 120, you have Abraham still living close to 200, around 200
mhm.
years, and pretty long lifespan. But it's interesting here that said, you'll be considered, a young man if you're dying at 100. So you don't quite sense that they're getting back to Methuselah or like a 969 age range, but
Mhm.
maybe age range closer to say what the patriarchs were kind of living towards